porch. We're going to have a real treat today. We're going to make comfort food. This is Saturday, it's not Sunday, but we're going to have a traditional Sunday dinner, which in many homes is pot roast. With the price of beef, I think more and more people are buying cheaper cuts of beef, if you buy beef at all. It's really been going through the roof. And a pot roast is the perfect way to make a cheaper cut of beef into a delicious meal. I'm using a chuck roast, and you can also use a blade roast, a shoulder roast, even a round roast. And the trick to pot roast is that you're braising the meat. Braising is a way to slow cook in liquid that tenderizes the tougher cuts of meat. But there is a little trick to it, and everybody's pot roast has their own secret ingredients and their own secret way of doing it. And I know my pot roast is not going to be nearly as good as your grandma's, but my grandkids think it is. I'm going to show you how I make my pot roast. It's a little bit different than what you might see Martha Stewart do. I actually have, over the years, watched Julia Child a lot and got a lot of tips from her. But once again, this is my recipe, a little bit different, and I'm going to show you how I do it. And now we're going to turn it over to the handy dandy prep crew. Go! Start now. You need to give yourself about 4 hours for this. Or more. My pot roast is 4.5 pounds, and I actually cook it a little lower than many people do. I'm pouring in some olive oil, just enough to barely cover the bottom of the pot. And this is going to take a little while to heat up. I've really struggled with finding a way in my kitchen to show you what I do, because it's really difficult on my stove. So I pulled out my handy dandy Cadco burner, and it's a really great portable burner, and I can put it over here where you can see the light over the stove is really bad. Let me talk a little bit about a mirepoix. We're going to have some new phrases here for some people, and for some people this is just everyday old hat stuff. A mirepoix is a flavor base. Different cultures have different flavor bases. Some cultures call it sofrito, some call it the Holy Trinity, but it's something you start out with that releases flavors from certain vegetables. And you've probably been doing it for years without knowing that somebody somewhere decided to call it a mirepoix. But when you're cooking, when you're braising, when you're cooking in water in the oven, or for many sauces, a mirepoix is the way you start, and it gives an underpinning of flavor to everything you cook. So I'm letting this heat up just a little bit. Your basic mirepoix is onions, carrots, celery, finely chopped, usually in the ratio of 2 parts onions, 1 part carrots, 1 part celery. You have more onions, and nothing smells as good as onions cooking. So we put them in. And it's going to take this a little while to heat up. The onions, the carrots, and notice these are finely diced. Big pieces, big onions, they don't release the flavor the same way. And I think a lot of folks don't dice things finely enough to get all the flavor out of them. I'll put more onions in later in this for the vegetable sides, and they'll be larger chunked, but for the mirepoix, you want small chunks. Okay, they're in the olive oil. We're going to wait till they start sizzling and I'll come right back to you. Going good now. I wish you were here. Then you could smell this lovely smell. So this is your basic mirepoix. That's M-I-R-E-P-O-I-X, mirepoix. To that, I add a little bit for pot roast. I have here some finely minced mushrooms. These are portobellos. You can use any kind. That's about a half a cup. I just find you get a little bit more mushroom flavor if you go ahead and add them to the mirepoix. And I have a teaspoonful of finely minced garlic. And I cheated on that. That was already minced garlic. And I'm going to cook those until the vegetables are translucent. The flavor and the aroma are all through the kitchen. We'll be back in the show. This is a 4.5 pound chuck roast. You can see it's highly marbleized. I do not cut the fat out. If you had any fat on it, the fat is actually only going to add to the flavor. The important thing is to dry the beef. Make sure that you have the moisture off of it. And this has been sitting out 20 minutes. You don't leave meat sitting out a long time, but it needs to come very close to room temperature. So we're going to dry it on both sides. Salt liberally. Now, what the handy dandy prep crew showed you was that 2 hours before I got ready to cook, we made a brine and we brined this beef. That is something I always do. I brine meat before I cook it. But I've rinsed that salt off, and salt is a tenderizer, and it really makes the flavor of the beef come out. And I know that's more salt than you think you want. Most of it's going to cook off, but that's really good for the beef, is to salt it, let it come to room temperature, dry it. Camera person, can you show us our pot? Now I've made a space in the middle. And what we're going to do now is brown the beef on all sides. The reason we brown it first is because water on beef keeps it from browning. It just will not brown. And the flavor of your gravy, the flavor of your beef, it all depends on the caramelizing of the surface of the beef. So we're going to let this brown on both sides, and then we'll come back to you. Okay, let's see what we've got here. It's starting to brown. Now hold in mind, we're not cooking now. We're just browning it. We're searing it. You can see down in there that this is still not cooked. We're starting to get a little bit brown on here, and I'm going to take it out because I have some more stuff to do before we actually put this on to braise. It may come apart because it's already pretty tender. Here in our mirepoix, we now have some of the beef juices. And I just have to tell you, this smells wonderful. And what we want when we get done is beef. We'll put some more vegetables in, and we want it in a thick, rich gravy. So I have here some clear gel. This has no salt in it, by the way. Will somewhat offset the amount of salt we add. This is about 3 tablespoons full. And I'm going to put it right down in there and let it start browning. And it will coat the veggies just a little bit. And we want that to sizzle for about a minute. I'll tell you again, as I usually do, when you're making a roux, and this is sort of like making a roux, you have to let the thickener sizzle a little bit, about a minute or so, to get rid of any pasty flavor. I have here, I'm not sure you can see it, a quart of bone broth that I made. The broth is an important part of this. You can use water. You don't have to use beef broth. You're still going to end up with beef gravy because you're going to get the flavor cooking from the beef. A lot of people use chicken broth. This is chicken broth, and I'm going to put it in here. You can certainly use the beef broth if you want to, but I have a lot of chicken broth already cooked up, and I want to use it before it's time to make more because I don't like canned goods to go past a year. So we're going to add this in. And this is the liquid. We may add a little water too. The trick about braising, or what defines braising, is that you cook in liquid. And we're going to put our beef right back in this. We want it to come up no higher than, we want the liquid to come up no higher than the shoulder of the meat. It doesn't have to come all the way up. You don't want it drowning. You're not boiling. You're braising. And so you want enough liquid to ensure that it's tender. And the reason that braising is good for a tougher cut of meat is because the slow cooking allows the tissue in the meat to dissolve, and that's what makes it tender all the way through. This is a chuck roast. It's not one of your more expensive, better, higher quality cuts of meat, but there's really nothing that tastes better when it's properly braised. We're now going to put this in the roaster. Okay, this is my Nesco 18-quart roaster. I use this as an oven, and it's particularly good for braising, especially when you have, hold on, I'll get a pot holder, something that needs to cook long and low. You don't have your, you don't have your oven on all day long. This is kind of out of the way. I have it set just under 300. Braised can cook anywhere from 250 to 350. At 350, it's going to take about 45 minutes a pound. I'm cooking it at about 285. It's going to take close to an hour a pound. I'm going to check back on this in 3 hours, and we'll be adding our vegetables and other ingredients. Be back to you then. Well, we're back. It's been about 3 hours, and we're going to see what we got. The pot roast is not done because it's going to take about 4 hours at the temperature setting I had. I should tell you too that just because I'm cooking it in a roaster, that's just how I do it. You can cook it in the oven at the same temperature, or you can cook it on top of the stove at a simmer. As long as you're careful not to get the heat too high. So let's see what we've got. I'll try not to break it again. You see, we've got that nice brownness in there. It isn't done yet. It needs to cook about another hour. But what would a pot roast be without the vegetables? And now's the time to put them in. I cut these a little ahead of time. This is potatoes and carrots and onions. And yes, we have a lot of carrots and onions in here. They have a good flavor. Let me show you that we are getting some of the thickness of gravy here. Some folks don't put the flour in to start with. I do. If you don't put the flour in to start with, flour or cornstarch, you can always make the brown gravy later. It's just doing it this way. The brown gravy is made when you take it out. We're going to give it another hour, and then I'll show you what we got. Well, here we are. It's been 4 hours. It's really hard not to look. Let's see what we've got here. I always have trouble serving this up. Okay, here we go. Here is our pot roast. There we go. I think that's picture perfect. What you hear is aluminum foil. It's really good to let roast beef rest about 10 minutes before you slice it. So I'm going to wrap that up, put it to the side. And I don't know about you, but that looks pretty good to me. We're going to slice it. I think it looks just right. How about you? You hear my puppy, Bobby. He thinks it smells just right. Very tender, very good. Sunday dinner, pot roast. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. I hope you enjoyed this video. I bought an extra one of these. I got them 2 for the price of 1. And the next video will be canning them up. So we will have beef tips canned for beef stew. Thank you.